What does astrology look like today? Astrology looks a lot like horoscopes. It also looks like astrology readings, workshops, and sometimes even wacky media stories. So let's take a look at astrology today and how this has contributed to astrology remaining out of favour. Horoscopes are a big part of astrology today, and they came into existence in 1930 after the birth of Princess Margaret. And sun sign-based horoscopes gave astrologers a new way of sharing astrology with the masses. And they do reach an awful lot of people through newspapers, magazines, and online. Horoscopes can be big business, especially for the Jonathan Cainers of the world, who at one point was the highest paid journalist in the UK, which the journalists in the UK were not very happy about. But horoscopes, unfortunately, are often considered to be a bit of light entertainment. They're not particularly personal, as they only offer 12 predictions for the entire world's population, and they're usually pretty general, out of necessity, really. They don't really showcase the benefits of astrology, and they're often just a bit of fun or a promotional tool. Not always, but certainly sometimes. And a big problem of horoscopes is that most people tend to think that this is all there is to astrology. And I was one of those people. I'd grown up reading horoscopes and star sign characteristics in magazines, and I honestly thought that this was all there was to astrology. I didn't know any better. I'd never seen or heard of a birth chart before. And I still remember the moment in my first astrology course 18 years ago when the teacher handed me a copy of my birth chart, and the words, "Well, what the hell is this?" ran through my head in that moment. And I didn't know what to do with it or what it meant. I soon learnt though, and I also learnt just how naive I was to think that horoscopes and star sign characteristics were all there was to astrology. This does tend to be the general understanding of astrology on a public level. And we need to work to change this perception, and that's partly what this presentation today is about. Now, I'm not suggesting to stop providing horoscopes, but I am suggesting that maybe we can look at other opportunities to use our talents where we can be of service to people who need our guidance and direction. I think we have more to offer than horoscopes. We also need to talk about how astrologers are presenting themselves and using astrology and sharing astrology today, as I believe that this is a contributing factor to astrology remaining out of favour. So I'm going to share some examples with you, and I'm interested to hear if you guys have witnessed something similar. So my first example is that about 10 years ago, I was part of a business group. And within this group, I was allocated an accountability buddy. His name was Matthew. He was a photographer and visual designer, and he had a pretty good sense of humour. But he was not impressed that he'd been allocated an astrologer as his accountability buddy. And he was very resistant towards me right from the word go. The problem was that he'd worked with a woman years prior who was an astrologer, and his experience of astrologers was strongly influenced by this woman's behaviour. He explained to me that he couldn't go to her to even ask a simple work-related question without her talking astrology to him. It sent him and his colleagues crazy. And she was a problem for him, and he never forgot it. The astrologer in this instance didn't read the situation properly and chose to inflict her passion onto her work colleagues who did not share her passion. She also did this in a way that prevented my accountability buddy and his colleagues from being open to what she was saying. And because of this, my accountability buddy didn't see me as a human. He could only see me as one of those annoying astrologers who'd caused him grief all those years ago. He couldn't get past his experience with his astrologer, and our accountability buddy relationship never really got off the ground. And his workplace astrologer alienated him, and he in turn alienated me, even though I hadn't actually done anything wrong. He'd already made up his mind about me before we even started our accountability buddy relationship. And our relationship came to a premature end because my buddy couldn't get past the astrology. I think it's wonderful that astrologers are so passionate about astrology that they want to share it with everyone. But we need to make sure that the people we are sharing it with want us to share it with them. We don't want it to be painful for them. We instead should want them to benefit from the experience. So the second story I'll share, it involves a direct encounter with an astrologer at a workshop. So I attended an astrology workshop probably only a couple of years into my studies. And the workshop was attended by a group of women who were fairly new to astrology from what I could work out, and who were basically enjoying a nice social afternoon with friends. The problem was that during the workshop, the teacher delivered content that showed some very glaring gaps in their knowledge, and nothing of any real substance was being shared. And I was one of the few people in the room who could see this. I did question the teacher a few times throughout the workshop, and I asked simple questions like, how did you work that out? But he actually struggled to answer such simple questions. And my questioning ended up getting him so frazzled that at one point he literally threw his hands up in the air and he stomped his feet and he said to me, if you want to learn about the subject, go read a book. So what I want to ask you is this how we want to teach people astrology? I would hope that we're not trying to pull the wool over people's eyes, but instead are creating a positive and encouraging learning experience for people interested in learning about astrology. So next example, it involves another direct encounter with an astrologer, but this person was my friend at the time. It was actually while I was trying to shop around my TV pilot for The Stars Behind the Stars that my astrology friend got herself in the media for a pretty ridiculous reason. My friend Mary, as I'll call her, she thought it would be a laugh to go to the media with the story that she could see herself getting married on her birthday the following year, even though she didn't even have a partner. It didn't seem to matter that there was a lack of astrological evidence to back up this prediction. She was going to go to the media anyway. She put astrology in a position where it was openly ridiculed in the media. And this media story made selling The Stars Behind the Stars much more difficult than what it already was. And I firmly believe that this media story played a role in the demise of my project. And I'm certainly not saying it's the only reason, but I am saying it is a key reason. It's very, very hard shopping around an astrology-inspired TV show, let alone when there's a wacky astrology story playing out in the media at the same time. So it's unfortunate that these kind of stories get media attention. And it's this kind of story that backs up the belief that astrology is for entertainment purposes and is to not be taken seriously. So is this how we want astrology represented in the media? If not, how do we want astrology represented in the media? How can we present astrology in the media in a way that builds credibility and doesn't feed into the stereotype that currently exists? I certainly tried to break the mold of astrology through my TV show, The Stars Behind the Stars, and I would love to have something like this be a normal part of our media landscape. So now, after all those stories I've just shared with you, I actually now have to admit that I've been guilty of presenting astrology in a way that's less than ideal. So about 15 years ago at work, when a new colleague joined our team, the first words out of my mouth when we met were, "What's your time of birth?" There was no hello or it's nice to meet you. I just cut to the chase. And although he gave me his birth details, the mention of astrology to this day makes his eyes glaze over, and I've played a role in that. He's still my friend all these years later, but he's never let me forget it, nor has he ever shown any interest in astrology. But why would he when this was his introduction to astrology? Horoscopes tend to be the main way astrology features in the media. It also shows up through articles. And I wanted to share a few astrology-based headlines from a magazine to point out something that I think is quite important. So in these examples, the astrology symbolism is the main headline. And what this means in your life is the secondary point. And I think this is the opposite of what it needs to be to connect with the readers. These headlines don't mean anything unless you're an astrologer, and therefore exclude a massive audience of people interested in personal development opportunities, all because these headlines are missing the mark. It's very simple to shift the message of these headlines. They become accessible to the masses and therefore open a new audience to the benefits of astrology. But we're not going to get people interested when we're talking about Neptune in Pisces. We're going to get them interested when we talk about something that connects with them emotionally. So I've written some examples of how these headlines can be adapted to more easily connect with potential readers. And they may not be hitting the mark. I'm just offering them as a suggestion, as a talking point. So instead of saying, Neptune and Pisces, magical influences on culture and society, maybe something like the magical influences impacting your life and our society. The astrology symbolism isn't actually needed. You can get into that in the article, but get the attention, get the buy-in first of a potential reader. And instead of Jupiter in Sagittarius, personal and global growth, what about how your personal growth aligns with world progress? Again, let's do the interpretation as opposed to talk about the symbolism. We're the only ones that really care about the symbolism. And instead of sun personalities, are you living your truth? What about live your truth, find your purpose? Something like that. I think we'd get more buy-in if we were, hitting people's emotions than talking about an astrological placement. That's just my perspective. So for those of you who write astrology-based articles, how can you shift the headline to make it easier for more people to hear what you have to say? Let's not alienate people. Let's instead give them a reason to show interest in what we have to offer. And that's what we need to do. Like on the front page of a magazine, we need to give them a reason to pick up that magazine and buy it and then read the articles. And it's as they're reading the articles that they can then learn about the astrological symbolism. But what it means to their life, I think, should be the priority. And lastly, I wanted to point out this Facebook post as it highlights a very key reason as to why astrology remains out of favour. So the comment is, I've highlighted it, perhaps if we had a public that was open-minded to astrology, blah, blah, blah. So we need to stop blaming the public for not being open-minded to astrology and instead deliver the message of astrology in a way that opens people's minds. We're never going to get people on side when we're blaming them for not understanding something we haven't given them a reason to show any interest in. So the reason why I wanted to share my perspective on astrology today is that we need to understand that the way we're delivering the message of astrology is contributing to astrology remaining out of favour. We need to look at the impact that we're having on astrology being out of favour through our actions today. Are we communicating in a way that allows the other person to hear what we're offering? This is whether we're communicating one-on-one, at a workshop, or via the media. How can we communicate more effectively so the people who need our help are open to receiving our help? There's lots of people right now that would benefit from some astrological guidance. And so let's make what we do more accessible to them. And I just wanted to point out as well why I've chosen this particular image to make the point around communication. So are you guys aware that 95% of plane crashes occur because of a communication issue? Good communication is important whether you are flying a plane or giving an astrology reading. You need to communicate in a way that allows the other person or people to understand what you're saying and practically apply your message. Can you make it easier for yourself to be heard? We need to understand that we are in a position to help people. And I think sharing our gifts and talents is more important now than ever before because our astrological insights can help people rebuild their lives during what is a very traumatic and chaotic time in our world. Are you able to take active steps to change the perception of astrology so it starts to come back in favour?